Tonight, we are on our night 3 as we continue to move into the space of how do we continue to work through that doubt and really getting into lasting confidence. And so tonight we will work on how do you dial it down. From last night, just a recap, we talked about some of the common triggers around those feelings of doubt and imposter syndrome. So when you are put into a new position, when you have a new task at work, when you are put on a very publicly visible project, when you're put on a complex project, interviewing for a new role, performance reviews, and that feeling rusty. And the triggers, you can put them in 4 broad categories of there's usually certain situations that cause triggers. There are certain places that could be in an office, it could be in a big meeting room, it could be on stage. For some people, it's things, maybe being put in front of a microphone or having to wear something or do something that you're not used to. It could be particular people, maybe it's senior leaders, maybe it's people on your team. And we talked about with situations, it could be you are presenting for the first time, you're in a networking event, and those situations start to cause that doubt just to come about. We had a lot of fun talking about toxic bosses, and I don't know if you all saw, but you inspired me to do a LinkedIn cute little short live or in a reel today around the bosses of the imposter syndrome. And yes, though that perfectionist boss that they saw that mistake in that little slide, the insecure boss who's so worried about their performance that they're all worried about your performance. And so they have to be involved in everything that you do. The erratic boss who's 1 minute you're the star, the next minute you're a disappointment. The prove it to me boss who, even though you have more than showed how capable and competent you are, they still make you reprove yourself all the time. And then that withholding boss that doesn't provide feedback on after a successful project, doesn't give praise, and also doesn't give constructive feedback if it didn't go well. You just get nothing from them. And how that can just be really challenging and triggering. And great question that was asked last night about how do you deal with these different types of bosses, and it's really doing your own work so that you can identify them and the work that you'll will do to not be as triggered by them, and then to also to do the work to have the courage to know when you need to leave and being able to make those sets of decisions and having that confidence that you can move forward and find a place that is going to be worth your talent. So tonight we're going to move into our automatic negative thoughts, or ants. And while that's a cute little ant there, ants are truly, they are beliefs that are usually irrational and that they immediately come into your consciousness, especially when you're triggered in a stressful event, and they diminish your confidence. And so when I think about ants, those are the automatic things of you walk into a meeting and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know the SVP was going to be here. I can't do this. And it's just so automatic. And so then that makes you clam up and not feel comfortable. We all have them. It's that inner critic. One of the things with the inner critic is we have these negative thoughts because at all times our brains are trying to keep us safe. And while we're not running from saber-toothed tigers anymore, we still have that anxiety that will come up in what we see as a threatening situation. And an automatic negative thought or that inner critic is there to protect you in what might feel like a life-threatening situation to you, but is the fear of the boss, of making the mistake, of giving that big presentation. And so our wiring from thousands and thousands of years is still there, and it shows up in our corporate spaces and in other places in our lives. So with our ants, there's about 17 of them, and I put them all in last night's workbook. So you have them all, but some of the major ones are mind reading, thinking, oh my gosh, this person thinks like I'm dumb, or this person doesn't think that I can do this work. And you don't actually know because you don't know what that person thinks unless you actually have the gift of mind reading. And we all the time start to predict what people think about us without having sufficient evidence. Another one of them is labeling. And so it's that saying, I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I don't have the right degrees for this. That person's rotten. That person's awful. That person doesn't care about anyone or doesn't care about the team. That person's selfish. And so the labeling, you start to assign global negative traits to yourself or others. And again, what is the evidence around that? There's fortune telling, which is one of my favorites, of that you predict the future negatively. Things will get worse or there is a danger ahead. So I'm going to fail the exam. I'm not going to get this job. You're already foretelling what's going to happen. And again, how is that helpful to predict a negative outcome before it happens? And what evidence do you have that supports the prediction? And how many similar situations that you predicted turned out badly actually didn't turn out as bad as you thought they would. And so really starting to think about that. Another one of my favorites is catastrophizing and really thinking that what has happened or will happen will be so awful and so unbearable that you can't stand it. And it's going to be, if I mess up this presentation, I'm going to get fired. If I mess this up, oh my gosh, they're gonna demote me and I'm never gonna work again. And those are again are things that are what's the purpose of imagining the worst possible outcomes? And does it really protect you or keep you safe in any kind of a way? And how realistic is that worst case scenario? And again, have you coped with something like this or a difficult situation in the past and how did it go? So I would say I am definitely a mind reader, a fortune teller, and I'm really great at catastrophes. Like everything is a catastrophe. So I don't know if any of these start to ring true for you. And as I'm reading them, feel free to drop a heart in the chat or give a thumbs up of, yeah, that's me. I can relate to that. Another one is about unfair comparisons and the that person's more successful than I am, or everyone else did better on me on the test than I did, or I would always think about from a professional standpoint, oh my gosh, everyone I went to school with, they're more successful than I am. They have a bigger title than I do. And why are you comparing yourself to someone else and not understanding your own unique circumstances? And like for me, one of the ones around unfair comparisons is I went to Harvard and all my friends are C-suite this and partner that, and I'm a director level. And realizing, yeah, and you moved to Williamsburg, Virginia, not a hotbed of big corporate anything, actually. Our school system is the largest employer in town. And also, I think not recognizing, so you don't know what sacrifices or what that other person's circumstance was. And in doing that comparison, you overlook your own strengths and achievements. And are you using that comparison for inspiration or for self-criticism? So the unfair comparisons. Another one is the dichotomous thinking. So all or nothing thinking. It's just, there's no in between. It's this is going to be a complete waste of time, or I get rejected by everyone. And so there is no gray area or there's nothing in between. And again, is what's the middle ground? Is there a partial success in here somewhere? So maybe you didn't, get the project launched and you did actually get a whole new discovery and a whole different line of work and it went down a different path that's actually better for the company. And so being able to think about things differently. There's also about discounting the positives. We're talking about the other day, you get a compliment around like what you did or how well you did. And that's what I'm supposed to do. That's what a great people leader does. And so it doesn't count because that's what you're supposed to do. Or that was really easy for me. So that doesn't really count because like I didn't struggle to get that. You dismiss the compliment. And again, it's what are you dismissing about your accomplishments or others' positive reactions to the things that you're doing? So that's another one. Emotional reasoning is where you start to think about, I feel depressed, so my marriage must not be working out. And you let your feelings interpret reality. And are your feelings actually accurate about reality? Like, what evidence do you have that contradicts that interpretation? How might temporary emotions influence your perspective? And what other explanations could there be for your feelings? That's one that pops up a lot. Another one is personalization. And so in personalization, you are thinking about everything that happens is because of something you did. So my marriage ended because I failed at it. You take on a disproportionate amount of the blame for negative events, and they fail to see that certain events are also caused by others. And so when you start taking responsibility that's beyond things that are beyond your control, and really think about what responsibility do you have in this situation, but what do other people bring to that? And if you were talking to a friend and this situation happened to them, how would you view it? And would you go in and blame that person? Probably not. You would have a more balanced view of what contributed to that. And so that over personalization, you take on too much ownership of what happens. And then lastly, overgeneralizing. So saying, oh, this happens to me. I seem to fail at things. You have a global pattern of negatives on the basis of a single incident. And so, again, based on one thing happening, like I messed up that presentation. I always mess up presentations. No, you don't. You might have misstepped on one, but what about the 10 years of presentations you did before that? Did you mess up every single one? Probably not. And so, helping to really be accurate about what is happening and not overgeneralizing. And then finding those situations where the opposite is true and figuring out like what a more accurate description of all that is. And so with these ants, the way that they work is you have the triggers that we talked about yesterday. So you're anxious during a presentation. And so then your ant is, I am a horrible speaker. And so the categories that can fall underneath, whether that's labeling or an emotional reasoning. And so then the resulting imposter syndrome action is you avoid any speaking opportunity because of that anxious and then that internal tape of I'm horrible at speaking. And because of that, it limits some of the things that you take on and some of the things that you could do and be very, really successful at. And it also limits your ability to learn and get better because you just avoid the situation as opposed to, hey, I might not be fantastic, but I'm sure I was better than last time. And it doesn't give you that opportunity to have that growth mindset and learn. And so the whole point with ants is this quote from Amit Ray is you are not your thoughts. You are the observer of your thoughts. And anyone who's done a meditation or sitting practice where, you're told, focus on your breathing, then let the thoughts come in and out and just observe them, which is lovely. And I think we all try, and it's really hard to do. And the thought, though, being able to learn, yes, sometimes you can't control the initial reaction. We're working on that so that doesn't happen. But it's then I had that thought of I can't speak in public. Okay, fine. I'm observing I had that thought. Now let me start to take steps that I know that's actually not true. And let me remind myself about that. And so really becoming more that observer and not being completely ruled by your thoughts. And so to counter ants, you need a counter argument. And to build that counter argument, having evidence-based thinking. So thinking about more of the facts versus the feelings. I might feel like I'm a poor speaker, but actually the last time I spoke, nobody walked out of the audience. So I couldn't have been that bad. Or the perspective shifting and seeing the bigger picture of if I was such a terrible speaker, then why did they ask me to be on this panel? Does that even make sense? The probability and realism, so challenging extreme thinking. If I was such a horrible speaker, then right, people wouldn't give me these opportunities. And what's the probability that I'm really going to bomb this when I'm sitting on a panel with four other people and it's not necessarily me giving a speech, it's me answering questions about things that I know and I'm an expert on. And again, recognizing your strengths and past successes of I am an expert in this area, and that is why they've asked me to be on this panel. And I was on a panel 6 months ago, and we got really good feedback about it. And realizing you're normalizing imperfection and growth. And yes, when I was on the panel 6 months ago, there were some of the points I wanted to say that I didn't say, and I stumbled over a couple of words, and I got one fact wrong. And that's normal. People stumble over words all the time when they're speaking, especially when they're speaking off the top of their heads. A fact, a number might get missed or incorrectly stated. It happens all the time. You can always go back and correct it. And shifting from the external to internal validation of, and on the last panel, when they scored us, I only got a 7 out of 10. And so maybe they don't think I'm that great of a speaker on the surveys. And realizing, hey, when I first started speaking 2 years ago, I was awful and the score showed it. And now I'm up to a 7. I am making progress and I've worked on this. And then questioning whether it's even true. And what if the opposite were true? What if you were such a good speaker? That's why they keep asking you to come back. And as you start thinking, finding what these negative thoughts are, starting to build what that counter argument is. And so the steps of challenging your answer, what's the evidence that this is actually true? How accurate have my predictions been in the past? Would others make that same prediction? So would your friend say that to you? And then what is the cost and benefits for me believing this thought? And because I'm making this prediction, what am I protecting myself from in theory? And what am I blocking myself from doing or experiencing or having growth? And starting, and I did it a little bit in the early section, but when you have that thought, when you realize, okay, I'm fortune telling here, there's different questions that you can ask yourself to start to slow down that automatic thought and really to examine it and looking what is the evidence? When was the last time that actually came true? Why is this hard for me? What payoff am I getting for what's it costing me or what's it benefiting me? Because I'm, let's say, invalidating the feedback. Why am I comparing myself to this person? Is that even a fair comparison or accurate? And so just having questions that interrogate what your automatic negative thought is. And when you develop what are more rational responses is acknowledging the effort that you have made up until this point for whatever it is that you're working on or that you think that negative thought is tied to, recognizing the strength and competence that you have in that particular area, balancing attribution of success. And so it's not, oh, I did well because Roma prepped me for 12 hours. And if she hadn't prepped me, I wouldn't have been able to do well. Yes, Roma prepped me for 12 hours. And I spent 4 weeks preparing, reading on this topic. And so balancing the attribution of success, accepting the imperfections and that you're learning and recognizing like everyone makes mistakes all of the time. And you probably don't judge people for their mistakes, and they're probably not judging you for yours or thinking about it, or will even remember 5 minutes from now. Having inclusion of context and complexity and really understanding like what it was the context in which you're working, and that might be very different from somebody else's context, and really appreciating that. Having your own agency and ownership like in the situation, but also letting other people have theirs. Recognition of your support without over reliance on it. So yes, you can have people that support you as you are working on your public speaking, but you're not relying on Roma's got to prep you 12 hours every time you speak. You are able to be self-efficacious around that. And then future focus and growth-oriented thinking. How do you take where you are, right? Appreciate where you are and move forward. I do a lot of Peloton, and so Jess Sims is one of my favorite instructors, and she always says, you're a masterpiece and a work in progress at the same time. And so how do you have that balance? In working with the ants, you recognize the trigger of I'm anxious during a presentation. You have that automatic negative thought of I am a horrible speaker, and you realize, okay, that's labeling and that's emotional reasoning. And you recognize your imposter syndrome action is I avoid any speaking opportunity. And then you start to ask yourself challenging questions. What evidence do I have that I'm actually a horrible speaker? What else might be going on that's driving me to think that? And then having a positive rational response and saying, okay, I'm having anxiety during my presentation, and this makes me distracted and less fluent during my presentation. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on managing my presentation anxiety with practicing mindfulness and taking more opportunities to practice speaking and taking that negative thought into something that's actionable. So we're going to take a couple of minutes at this stage to work on our ants and taking a couple of minutes to write down what some of your triggers are that you identified last night, what some of your ants might be, and then just starting to fill out this for one or two, and then you can take some time to continue to work on it after tonight's session. One of the places that you can take this to the next step is it's called ant cards. And so on the front, you write, you can just make it on an index card or whatever, but on the front, you write like, what is your automatic negative thought? And then on the back side, you write, what is that new narrative and new sets of action? So your new positive response and your new action and carrying it around with you. And so when that thing comes, you actually have a physical anchor or having those ant cards in front of you at your laptop or on your desk that just reminds you of, yes, that might be your thought, but you have a new way or new action of addressing it. So something as a takeaway for you to take it to the next level is creating those ant cards. This has been a joy and a pleasure to talk about this confidence transformation. And because I've mentioned in other nights, there is an 8-week class that I'm starting that goes through all of this. And so what happens in that 8-week class is, like I said, we've just scratched the surface of everything that helps to either address imposter syndrome or just help, I would say, build self-confidence. And to me, this has been life-changing and unlocking. I'm still learning and working through, and I keep going back to the tools because I recognize how much my self-doubt has held me back in my career, in my life, and learning and leaning into things that are scary. And I am a student alongside a practitioner around all of this. And so in the 8 weeks, we would first start with imposter syndrome, spending that first week building our container, having the introduction. So going a little bit more in depth to what we did on night one, and then going through the genogram. Weeks 2 and 3 will focus on transforming our triggers and stories and going through different imposter scenarios. So we touched on it a little bit in night two, but it's going much deeper and then reframing that self-perception and envisioning a different future. And so different tools that we have around that are looking at a statement of position map so you can understand in the greater context where your self-doubt lies. There's an expressive letter exercise that we do, an autobiography exercise, the thickening the narrative. I talked a little bit about that last night, but going from I'm not great at presentations to I am so much better than I was 12 months ago. And I took this class and it's making me even better because I've worked with a coach around my executive presence and presentation skills. So there's a whole series of identifying what your narratives are and starting to make them thicker. And then in weeks 4 and 5, two parts. So internalizing success. A lot of the self-doubt is we forget all of the things that we have done and survived and thrived in that got us to the place we are today. So uncovering our hidden talents and our hidden accomplishments, and then have a broader understanding of all of our strengths. And doing that, I use a hidden accomplishments exercise. We continue to go deeper into the ants and we'll provide more guidance on each of your individual ants. And then also using the multiple intelligences model and really expanding beyond what a lot of people see as their intelligence and their genius and recognizing that there's many more out there. Week 6, we focus on self-care and burnout and boundaries. Folks that have self-doubt, a lot of times, as we talked about, overwork or do things that put others ahead of themselves. And we'll assess burnout and then establish micro habits for sustainable self-care and mindfulness. And so a lot of times where people talk about self-care on social media about like toxic self-care, this isn't, I'm going to go to the spa and I'm going to go to Bali and meditate for 12 weeks. This is what are micro habits that you do every day that help pour into you and make sure that you can sustain everything that you're trying to do in your life. And that provides that balance. So we will look at different burnout measures, working on a schedule of pleasant events in your life, putting in a self-care structure and identifying those things that are truly nourishing to you that don't require money, that don't require a lot of time, but are things that you can do on a daily and weekly basis. Week 7, we'll talk about roles and inflexibility and imposter syndrome. So generally, there are 5 sort of rigid roles in those who have self-doubt, and there's more flexible ways to be and more growth-oriented ways to be. So we will spend time figuring out what imposter roles we each tend to take on, and what we do those because we're getting some sort of benefit out of it, but there's also a cost. So analyzing that and then working on what could be a new role expansion. And then lastly, on the last week, talking about how do we create and cultivate supportive relationships for growth. My goal as a coach is to give you as much support as you need so that you can do this on your own. And so we talk about assessing dream team needs and who is on your dream team, and that there are 6 or 7 different roles and identifying 2 or 3 people for those roles. And then also creating coping cards. And these coping cards we do after each section, but they help remind you and give you a physical anchor for all of the work that we did. So that is what would be included in the 8-week class that I'm starting next week. Those classes, I know Wednesday nights, we're all really busy, and those would be recorded. So if you had to miss a session, you would always be able to catch up, and really just spending some time to deepen the work that we've started to do here. Because as you can see, there's a lot more that really goes into working towards through self-doubt. I really think like this is something that as women, in terms of propelling ourselves, having that opportunity to quiet our doubt and really step into who we fully are. And so because of that, I am offering it at $897, which is taking $600 off before I release it to the public later this week. You all have been a wonderful group to engage with. The sessions would be like this, some teaching, and then individual work, and really being able to dive in with each other kind of in the group setting. And then I'm also doing one-on-one coaching sessions with each of you to really get into this imposter work and this growth work. And if you sign up tonight, I will give an extra coaching session. So that's a $500 value. So you'd get 3 individual coaching sessions in addition to the 8-week group coaching and the work on the side, as well as a Facebook group. I am going to close this overall offer of $897 on Friday night, and then the price will go up over the weekend and into next week as I offer it to others. But I wanted to give you all this rate because you've been fantastic. There's a QR code if you want to go to the site to see and be able to make that purchase. Tomorrow, I will also do a bonus night. So if you're not doing anything from 8 to 9 on Friday and you have additional questions or things that have come up, or you want to understand more about the 8-week session, I will be available. And it's the same link, and I'll send it back out. But it's an option if you've got more things, or if there are some individual things that you want to ask me, but not so much in the group setting, I will be there. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you. It has been wonderful. You all are fantastic women. Some of you I know, some of you are new, but I am here to help and to support you. If there are folks in your life who need some support as well, please send them my way. But I am just truly grateful for the time we spent tonight and together.